The wind had teeth, and it was chewing Lydia's face raw. She kept her head down, a thin, frayed shawl pulled tight over her hair. But the ice found its way in. It clung to her eyelashes, making the world a painful, blurry white. Her feet were gone. She knew they were still there, attached to her legs, because she could feel the dull, heavy ache of the bones. But the skin was numb. The leather of her shoes, worn through at the soles weeks ago, was frozen stiff as wood. Dead Mule Pass. It looked like the name felt. The town was just a gash in the wilderness. A handful of raw lumber buildings hunched against the side of a mountain, stained dark by soot and snow. A single muddy track, frozen solid in jagged ruts, served as its main street. It was ugly. It was cold. And it was the end of the line. Lydia had been walking for 3 days since the last wagoner had tossed her a dried biscuit and refused to take her further, his eyes lingering on her with a mix of pity and contempt that she was beginning to know well. She had nowhere to go back to and nothing to go toward. There was only forward. She fell against the hitching post outside the largest building, the one with the warped sign that read, "The Gilded Cage. Saloon." Heat and noise spilled out as a man stumbled backward through the doors. Laughing? Lydia pushed past him, desperate, into the wall of warmth. The smell hit her first: stale beer, unwashed bodies, cheap tobacco, and frying fat. The saloon was packed, miners and trappers and men with no good name, all shouting over the racket of a tinny piano. Every eye turned to her. The noise died, replaced by a low, appraising murmur. She stood there, dripping, shaking, a ghost at the feast. We ain't hiring," a man behind the bar yelled, wiping a glass with a dirty rag. "Please," Lydia whispered. Her voice was a dry crackle. "Shelter, just the floor. I can work, I can clean." The man, big-bellied and sweating, laughed. "Floor's full, sweetheart, and the beds upstairs are for paying customers." He looked her up and down, a slow, greasy appraisal. "Or customers who can pay and trade. You look like a stiff breeze'd snap you in two. Bad for business." A few men chuckled. Lydia felt the familiar, hot rush of shame sting her frozen cheeks. She backed away, pushing back out into the wind, which seemed to scream at her failure. She tried the general store next. A bell tinkled above the door. It was warmer, quieter, smelling of coffee beans and cured leather. A man with a gray beard and steel-rimmed glasses looked up from his ledger. "Closed," he said, though the sun was still a weak smudge in the sky. "I have no money," Lydia said, hating the words. "But I can mend, I can wash, just for a piece of bread, or a place by the stove." The man gestured to the pot-bellied stove, where 2 grizzled miners were spitting tobacco juice into a bucket. "No room," he said flatly, and turned back to his numbers. She was turned away from the livery, the assayer's office, and a small, shuttered bakery. The cold was moving from her skin into her blood. It was making her slow, her thoughts thick as molasses. Death by freezing, she'd heard, was like falling asleep. She was so very tired. She saw a smaller cabin at the edge of the town, set back from the main rut, a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. Hope, stupid and stubborn, flared again. She dragged her feet to the door and knocked. It opened a crack. A woman's eye, dark and suspicious, peered out. "What?" "Please, ma'am, I'm freezing. I don't need anything but a place out of the wind." The door opened wider. The woman was gaunt, wrapped in a man's heavy coat, her hair pulled back so tight it stretched the skin of her face. She looked Lydia over, her gaze sharp and missing nothing. She saw the worn wedding band Lydia still wore, the hollows in her cheeks, the desperation. "You alone?" the woman asked. "Yes. Where's your man?" "Gone," Lydia whispered. The woman's face hardened. "Gone or kicked you out?" Lydia flinched. The woman sighed, a sound of profound irritation. She disappeared for a moment, then returned with half a loaf of stale bread and a chunk of hard cheese. She shoved them into Lydia's hands. "Take this," she said. "But you can't stay. I'm a widow. I got enough trouble feeding myself without taking in strays. This town, dead mule, it's got no place for a useless woman." The word hit Lydia like a slap. Useless. It was the same word her husband, John, had used. The same word the women in their Utah community had whispered when she'd failed to carry the child. Useless, barren, broken. I can work," Lydia tried, but her voice broke. The widow's eyes were cold, but not entirely unkind. "Work is for men, or for women who can give men sons. You ain't got the look of either. You're just another mouth, and a hungry one. Eat that and move on. Don't sleep in the street. The wolves'll drag you off before morning." The door closed. Lydia stood there, the bread clutched in her numb hand. The wind howled, snatching the woman's words and screaming them back at her. Useless, useless, useless. She sank onto a nearby stump, the snow soaking through her thin skirt, and tried to eat. The bread was hard as rock. She had to gnaw at it, tears freezing on her cheeks. She was going to die here, in this awful town, with a name like a joke. She was crying, a dry, choked sound, when a man stepped out of the saloon, sweeping ice and sawdust off the porch. It was the barkeep. He watched her for a moment, then grunted. "You still here?" Lydia looked up, too broken to feel shame anymore. He sighed, leaning on his broom. He wasn't a kind man, but maybe he wasn't a cruel one either. "Look, I can't let you in. The sheriff, he don't like vagrants, but—" "There's a place?" Lydia waited, hardly breathing. "Up the mountain," he said, gesturing with his chin. "'Bout 2 miles, follows the ridge. There's a trapper lives up there. Boone." "Boone?" "Just Boone. He's a hard man. Mean, most folks say, don't come to town but twice a season. Trades his pelts and leaves, lives alone. Has for years." The barkeep looked at the sky, which was darkening to a bruised purple. The snow was falling thicker. "He might shoot you, or he might not. But it's a roof, if you can make it." He didn't wait for an answer. He went back inside, slamming the door against the coming night. Lydia looked at the bread in her hand. Then she looked up the mountain. It was a black mass of pine and rock, already disappearing into the blizzard. Shoot her, or not. It was better than the wolves. She got to her feet, her joints screaming. She shoved the last of the bread into her mouth and started walking, leaving Dead Mule Pass behind. The climb was not a walk. It was a fight. There was no trail, just the barkeep's vague direction. The ridge. She kept the steep drop-off to her right and climbed. The snow was knee-deep in places, shallower in others where the wind had scoured the rock bare. She fell, catching herself on wrists that were already raw. She crawled. The world shrank to the next tree, the next boulder. The wind was a solid, shoving thing, trying to push her back down the mountain. She lost track of time. It was full dark now. The blizzard a churning, screaming chaos. She was losing. Her legs gave out. She fell forward into a deep drift, the snow soft as a feather bed, and she did not have the strength to get up. It was so warm. Suddenly, the wind faded to a gentle hum. She was sleepy. She remembered her mother, a lifetime ago, humming a lullaby. It was nice. She would just rest her eyes. Just for a moment. She was asleep before she even closed them. A boot kicked her. It was rough, angry. She grunted, the air forced from her lungs. "Get up!" The voice was a gravelly roar, barely louder than the storm. Lydia tried to move, but her limbs were water. A shape loomed over her, huge and dark, covered in furs. A bear. No, a man. He cursed, a low, vicious sound. "Damn it all! Damn this mountain!" He grabbed the front of her coat. hauling her up from the snow like a sack of flour. She was unconscious again, or near enough. She felt a brief, jarring sense of motion, of being lifted. His shoulder was hard as oak against her stomach. The world swung, and then, mercifully, went black. The first thing she felt was pain. It was a sharp, agonizing burning in her feet and hands. She cried out, a small, animal sound. The second thing was warmth. A fire. She could hear it crackling, feel its dry heat on her face. She forced her eyes open. The room was small, built of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud. The ceiling was low, hung with iron traps, dried bundles of herbs, and the skinned, frozen carcasses of several hares. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, throwing flickering, monstrous shadows. Rifles rested on pegs by the door. Pelts, wolf, deer, beaver, were tacked to the walls and piled in the corners. It was a man's space, a wild man's space. It smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, blood, and cured meat. Lydia was on a cot, a narrow bed of logs laced with rope, covered in a thick, heavy bearskin. She was wearing only her thin chemise and drawers. Her dress, frozen solid, was steaming near the fire. She tried to sit up, panicked, but a hand shoved her back down. "Stay." He was across the room, sitting on a low stool, a whetstone in one hand and a long, wicked-looking knife in the other. He was the man from the snow. He was built like the mountain, broad-shouldered and solid. His hair and beard were long, dark and tangled with ice. His eyes, in the firelight, were the color of gunmetal. He wore buckskins, dark with old stains and new snow. He didn't look at her. He just kept working the stone against the blade. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Lydia swallowed, her throat dry. "Where?" "My cabin." He didn't stop the knife. "My feet," she whimpered as another wave of fire shot through her ankles. "Frostbit. You keep 'em covered." He nodded toward her feet. They were wrapped in thick, greasy strips of wool. "You walk on 'em, you'll lose 'em." He got up. Lydia flinched, pulling the heavy bearskin up to her chin. He was huge, filling the small cabin, blocking the firelight. He ignored her, moving to the fireplace where a pot hung over the flames. He ladled a thin, hot broth into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. He didn't offer it. He set it hard on the floor by the cot. "Eat." Lydia stared at him, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he growled, seeming to read her mind. "If I was, you'd be dead already. Now eat, or don't, and die. Makes no difference to me." He went back to his stool, to his knife. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the bowl. But the broth was hot, salty, and thick with meat. It burned its way down to her stomach, and life, sharp and painful, returned with it. He watched her from under his thick brows. "Who are you?" he asked. "Lydia." "Lydia what?" "Lydia, just Lydia. Folks in town send you?" "No, the barkeep. He said there was a trapper." Boone snorted. "Silas, he's a fool. Sent you to your death." "I was dying there," she whispered, setting the empty bowl down. Boone stopped sharpening. He looked at her, his gaze intense, assessing. "Why? You run from someone?" "No." "Your husband?" Lydia flinched. A sharp, sudden recoil, as if he'd raised his hand. His eyes narrowed. He saw the movement. He looked at her worn wedding band, then at her bruised, hollowed face. He didn't ask again. He stood, hung the knife on a peg, and pulled a pile of furs near the door, as far from her cot as the small room would allow. He lay down, his back to her, a rifle resting beside him. "The storm's settling in," he said, his voice muffled by the furs. "Could be 3 days. Could be 10. Stay off your feet. Don't touch my tools, and don't let that fire go out." Within minutes, a low, steady snore vibrated from the pile of furs. Lydia lay awake for hours, listening to the two sounds, the man's breathing and the storm screaming outside, clawing at the little cabin that stood between her and death. They were trapped. The storm raged for 4 days. The world outside the cabin's single, grime-covered window was a churning, solid white. The wind never stopped. It shrieked and moaned, a living thing trying to tear the roof from the walls. Inside, the silence was almost as loud. Boone was a creature of rough, silent routine. He would wake before dawn, feed the fire until it roared, then pull on his heavy furs and go out into the white chaos. He'd be gone for an hour, or 3, checking his trap lines. He always returned caked in ice, his beard frozen solid. He would drop a brace of hairs by the door, kick the snow from his boots, and spend the next hour skinning them with economical, brutal grace. He said almost nothing to her. He fed her twice a day. He'd shove the bowl of broth or a chunk of smoked, tough meat at her. When he saw her shiver, he tossed another heavy wolf pelt onto her cot. "Cover up," he'd grunted. When he'd first checked her feet on the second day, she had tensed, pulling away as he reached for the bandages. "Stop," he'd ordered, not unkindly, just with simple, final authority. "They'll go black if I don't. You want to walk out of here? Or crawl?" He was surprisingly gentle. His hands were huge, calloused, and stained, but his touch was careful as he unwrapped the wool, examined the red, blistered skin, and applied a thick, sharp-smelling salve before rewrapping them. Lydia watched him, her throat tight. She winced, but not just from the pain. It was the nearness, the touch. It had been so long since a man had touched her without anger or demand. He never spoke of it. He just did the work and moved away, putting the space of the cabin back between them. He was a harsh guardian. When she tried to stand on the 3rd day, needing to use the chamber pot tucked in the corner, he'd barked, "I told you to stay off him." "I have to," she'd whispered, mortified. He'd cursed, grabbed the pot, and shoved it at her. "Do it! I'll turn around." And he did, standing at the door, staring out into the storm. His actions were protective. His words were rock hard. He was a walking contradiction, and he terrified her. On the evening of the 4th day, the wind finally quieted. The silence it left behind was heavy, oppressive. Lydia was stronger. The color had returned to her face, and the burning in her feet had subsided to a dull ache. She was sitting up on the cot, the bearskin around her shoulders, watching him mend a snowshoe. She had to say something. She had to explain. She couldn't be a useless mouth here, too. "Boone," he grunted, not looking up. "When the storm breaks, I can't go back to the town." He kept lacing the rawhide. "Figured. I have nowhere to go." He stopped. He looked at her, his gray eyes flat. "That ain't my concern, girl." "I know," she rushed, her voice trembling. "I know. But I can work. I'm not weak. I can cook. I can clean. I can mend your clothes. I cook my own food. I don't mind dirt, and my clothes are fine." "Please," she whispered. I can't be out there alone." He put the snowshoe down. "Why? What happened to you? Why'd your husband kick you out?" The question was blunt. There was no escaping it. Lydia looked down at her hands. "He didn't just kick me out. He cast me out. He called me ruined." Boone waited. The fire crackled, filling the silence. "We were married 5 years," she said, her voice barely audible. "In Utah. He was a good man, a rancher. We wanted a family. I got with child, but I lost it. It was winter. The baby. It was a boy. He came too soon." She was quiet for a long time. Lost in the memory, Boone did not move. After that, Nothing. I wouldn't take. The doctor said the fever had scarred me inside, that I was barren. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. He told the elders I was broken, that God had turned his face from me. He took another wife, a younger woman, healthy, and he told me to go. She took a shaky breath. He said, men don't want broken things. They don't want a field that won't grow crops. Boone's expression did not change, but Lydia saw his hands, resting on the snowshoe. His knuckles were white. He was gripping the wood so hard she thought it might snap. He looked away from her, toward the fire. His jaw was a hard line of granite, a muscle twitching under the rough beard. Lydia shrank back, expecting the anger, expecting him to agree, to tell her to get out. But the anger wasn't for her. She saw it. Then, it was a cold, quiet fury, radiating from him like heat from the stove. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the husband, at the elders, at the world that could take a woman and break her, and then call her useless for being broken. He said nothing. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't say a single word. He just stood up, took his heavy coat from the peg, and went outside. Slamming the cabin door so hard a puff of snow fell from the rafters. Lydia watched him go. She sat there, trembling, as the tears finally came. He had not yelled at her. He had not pitied her. He had just been angry on her behalf. When he came back an hour later, his face was calm, frozen. He added wood to the fire and checked her feet, his touch as rough and careful as before. That night, they prepared for sleep in their usual silence. He on his pile of furs by the door, she on the cot. But the silence was different. The storm had passed, and the quiet in the cabin felt, for the first time, almost like peace. The world outside the cabin was a fresh, blinding white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like the mountain was holding its breath. The snow lay in massive drifts, 5 feet deep in places, sculpted by the wind into smooth, rolling waves. The air was sharp as a razor, but the sun was a pale, hopeful wafer in the sky. Boone kicked the cabin door open, letting in a blast of cold, clean air. He looked at the sky, then at the wood pile, which was dwindling. Need to clear the traps, and we need wood. Fire's low. Lydia, who had spent the last 2 days carefully rubbing Boone's greasy salve into the healing, blistered skin of her feet, stood up from the cot. Her legs were shaky, her ankles stiff, but she was whole. I can help. Boone looked at her, then at the heavy axe leaning against the wall. He seemed to debate it, his expression unreadable. He gave a short, sharp nod toward a smaller hatchet. Don't chop your foot off. Boone, Lydia learned, was not a teacher. He was a man who did things, and he had no patience for those who could not. He expected the world to be as hard as he was, and he had no words for failure. He showed her how to feed the fire, his big hands moving with surprising delicacy. You feed it, he growled, demonstrating how he laid small, dry twigs over the coals. You don't smother it, let it breathe. A fire needs air more than wood. She tried, and twice she smothered the new coals, filling the cramped cabin with acrid, stinging smoke until Boone cursed, shoved her aside, and resurrected the flames himself with a few angry puffs of breath. He showed her how to melt snow for water. Always have water hot, he commanded, packing a kettle with clean snow from a barrel outside the door. You get cold inside, you die. Coffee's a luxury, hot water's life. But the wood was the true test. The wood was where she failed. He led her to a clearing behind the cabin, where several large pine logs lay half buried in the snow. He showed her how to brace her feet, how to find the grain. It ain't about your arm, he grunted, swinging his own axe. The heavy steel head split a massive round with a single, satisfying thwack. It's about the heft, the weight of the steel. You just guide it, lift, let it fall. Lydia took the smaller hatchet, It felt heavy, badly balanced in her gloved hands. She set a smaller log upright. She lifted and let it fall. The hatchet glanced off the side, sending a chip of bark flying into her face. "Again," Boone said, not looking up from his own work. She tried again. This time the blade bit, but only an inch deep, and stuck. She had to wrestle it free. Again. She swung. She missed. She swung again, hitting the log, but with no force. Her arms, weak from weeks of near starvation, began to burn. Her shoulders ached. The healing blisters on her feet screamed from the pressure of standing in the deep snow. Beside her, Boone's rhythm was a brutal judgment. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Wood piled up at his feet. Lydia panted, her breath pluming in the frigid air. I can't. Can't means you freeze, he said flatly. He turned, grabbed another massive log, and split it with one stroke. The sound of his success, the sight of the wood falling apart so easily for him, was an accusation. She looked at the log at her feet. It was just a piece of wood. She was a grown woman. Why could she not do this one? Simple thing. Useless. The word echoed in her head, cold and sharp. The widow's voice, her husband's voice. I can do it, she muttered, her voice tight. She raised the hatchet high, putting every ounce of her frustration, her fear, her deep, biting shame into the blow. She swung too hard, too fast. The axe hit the frozen wood at an angle, twisted in her grip, and the heavy hickory handle slammed hard into her shin. Pain, bright and sickening, shot up her leg. It was the last straw, the final, bitter indignity. Lydia screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of pure, undiluted rage. She threw the hatchet as hard as she could, watching it spin and bury itself in a snowdrift. I hate it. She turned on the log, kicking it, sobbing. I hate it. I can't do it. I can't do anything. She sank to her knees in the snow, punching the unyielding wood with her gloved fists. Useless. I am useless. The sobbing took over, harsh, animal sounds tearing from her chest. She hadn't cried like this, not when John cast her out, not when she'd walked into Dead Mule Pass to die. This was the bottom, the final, raw admission of her own brokenness. Boone stopped working. The steady thwack of his axe went silent. Lydia tensed, squeezing her eyes shut. She waited for the blow. She waited for him to yell at her, to call her a fool, to grab her and shake her. She heard the crunch of his boots in the snow. He was behind her. He was looming. He didn't speak. Instead, two huge hands gripped her shoulders. He hauled her to her feet, his grip like iron. He turned her around and pulled her against his chest. It was not a gentle embrace. It was an act of containment. His arms, thick as pine branches, wrapped around her, pinning her arms to her sides. He held her head against the rough, cold buckskin of his coat, which smelled of smoke, pine, and winter. He held her tight, like he was stopping a wound from bleeding, crushing the sobs against him. Lydia fought him for a moment, her muffled blows landing weakly against his ribs. Let me go! No, he growled, his voice a low vibration against her ear. He just held on. He didn't pat her back. He didn't whisper soothing words. He just stood there, solid as the mountain, a human wall against the wind, and let her break. She wept until she had nothing left, until her body was limp, her breath coming in ragged, hiccuping gasps. He held her until the last tremor passed. Only then did his grip loosen. He set her back from him, his hands still on her arms, holding her steady. He looked at her, his face unreadable, his beard rimed with frost from her breath. Her face was a mess, wet with tears, snot and sweat. Go inside, he said, his voice rough. Fire's low. He released her, turned, picked up her hatchet from the snow. He walked to the log she had been fighting, and in one furious, powerful swing, split it clean in two. That night, the cabin felt smaller, the air thicker. He had not mentioned her breakdown. She had not apologized. He had just kept bringing in wood, and she had kept the fire fed, her shame a heavy weight in her stomach. They ate their supper, a thick stew of hair and dried roots, in their usual silence. But after, Boone did not retreat to his stool to oil his traps. He pulled his stool closer to the hearth, near her cot. He motioned with his chin. "Sit." Lydia slid off the cot and sat on the floor, leaning her back against the rough-hewn logs, the heavy bearskin wrapped around her shoulders. They were close enough to share the heat, close enough to see the details in each other's faces in the firelight. She saw the fine white scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a faint silver line. He saw the network of tiny lines around her eyes, lines of sorrow, not age. "You said, the baby," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an order to continue the story she had started days ago. Lydia stared into the flames, her throat tight. "He was beautiful, so small. I held him." Her voice was a dry whisper. It was March, still so cold. He came too soon. He was cold, and I held him all night, trying to make him warm, but he never cried." She paused, tracing the grain of the floorboards with her fingernail. "My husband, John, he took him in the morning. He buried him on the hill while I was sick. The sickness took me for weeks, a fever. When it broke, the doctor from town, he examined me." She hated this part, the shame of it. "He said the fever had burned me out, that my womb was scarred shut. A closed door. He called it." She looked up at Boone. His face was shadow and stone. "John tried. For a year, he'd come to my bed, but it was just work." Her voice broke. "Angry work. And when nothing took, he stopped. He started looking at me, like I was a broken plow, like I was a blight on his house." She pulled the fur tighter around her. "The day he brought the new wife home, Hannah, she was only 17. He told me I was released from my bond. He gave me a bag with $10 and told me to be gone by morning. He said he couldn't stand the sight of my emptiness in his house." The cabin was silent save for the pop and crackle of the fire. Boone tossed a piece of pine bark into the flames. It flared, bright and hot, illuminating the sudden, cold fury in his eyes. "I had a wife," he said, his voice a low rumble. Lydia started, stunned. He had never offered a word about himself. "Sarah, she was small." A rough, pained sound escaped his throat. It might have been a laugh, once, and loud, always laughing, always telling me I was a fool. He leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the fire, seeing something else. 2 sons. Jacob, he was 6. Eli, he was 4. Jacob, he was smart, reading already. Eli, he was just mean, always pulling the dog's tail. His voice dropped, became flat, dead. "We had a place down in the valley, near the Snake River. Good land. This cabin. This was just for trapping." He was quiet for so long. Lydia thought he was finished. "It was 1873, he whispered, the words ragged. "Bannock raiders. They'd been quiet for a year. I got greedy. The pelts were prime. I told Sarah I'd be gone 2 nights, just to check the high traps." He closed his eyes, his whole body tensing. "I saw the smoke from the ridge, all the way from the ridge. I ran, for miles. I didn't stop, but I was too late." The silence in the cabin was awful, full of the things he wasn't saying. "I found them," he whispered. They took everything, burned the cabin, killed the stock, and Sarah, the boys, I buried them. And then I came up here, and I ain't been back down." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes hollow, ravaged. "Your husband, He's a weak, cruel man, but me, I'm not a good man. Lydia, I'm the man who let his family die for a handful of beaver skins." Lydia felt her own grief set aside, replaced by a sudden, fierce rush of something, not pity, understanding. She reached out, slowly, her hand trembling. She put her small, chapped hand on his massive, scarred forearm. His skin was hot, the muscles beneath rigid as stone. He flinched, a sharp intake of breath, but he didn't pull away. "Maybe not," Lydia said, her voice quiet but clear. "But you're the only man who's ever let me cry." His gaze locked on hers. He saw no judgment in her eyes, no fear, just a shared, terrible brokenness. He slowly, almost unconsciously, turned his arm, his calloused fingers brushing the back of her hand. It was the lightest touch, but it burned like a brand. The air in the cabin changed after that. The line between them, the space he had kept so clear, had dissolved. They talked more. Not much, but the words mattered. He told her about the mountain, the way the seasons turned, the signs of a bad winter, the difference between a wolf track and a dog's. She told him about her home back east, before Utah, about her mother's rose garden, a thing that seemed impossible in this hard, frozen world. He taught her to use a small skinning knife, and her stomach turned. But she did it. She taught him. She taught him to sit still, to just sit by the fire and not do anything, to just listen to the wind. A week passed, then another. Her feet healed completely. Her body, fed on rich stew and smoked meat, filled out. The gaunt hollows in her cheeks softened. She was still thin, but she was strong. The tension that returned to the cabin was not the tension of fear. It was something new, something thick and heavy and unspoken. It was the way his eyes lingered on her when she brushed her hair by the fire, the long brown strands crackling with static. It was the way her breath caught when he walked past her in the narrow space, his arm brushing hers, the heat of him a palpable thing. One night, she was mending his shirt. The buckskin was thick, the needle hard to push through. She pricked her finger, a dark bead of blood welling up. "Damn it!" she hissed, putting the finger in her mouth. Boone was across the room, oiling a rifle, the metal parts laid out on a cloth. He stopped. He watched her. She looked up, met his gaze. The air went thin. He put the rifle down, piece by piece, with deliberate care. He stood up and crossed the room. He didn't stop until he was standing over her, his shadow falling across her, blocking the firelight. "Lydia," he said, just her name. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. Her heart was a trapped bird against her ribs. "Boone." He knelt, slowly, as if fighting a great battle with himself. He reached out and touched her face. His thumb, rough as sandpaper, brushed her cheekbone. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing. He lowered his head. The kiss was slow, hesitant. It was not gentle, but it was not rough. It was uncertain. His beard was abrasive against her skin, his lips chapped and warm. It tasted of smoke and coffee and something that was just him. She made a small, surprised sound, and her hands came up to grip his shoulders, to steady herself. The small sound broke his control. The kiss deepened. His other hand came up, burying itself in her hair, holding her still. It was a kiss of profound, starved loneliness. It was desperate. Then, just as quickly, he broke it. He pulled back, his breath coming hard, his eyes dark. He looked angry. "No." "What?" she whispered, confused, her body aching. You're still weak," he growled. He looked like he hated himself. "You're still healing. I won't be that man." "That man?" Lydia stared at him, a sudden spark of her own anger rising. "What man? The man who saved my life? The man who fed me? The man who held me while I fell apart?" "I'm taken advantage. You're trapped here." "No." She gripped the front of his shirt. "No, you're not. I'm not weak." She looked him in the eye, her gaze fierce. "I'm not broken. Not anymore. I want this." She was terrified, her voice trembling, but she was more terrified of being alone again, of being nothing. "Boone, I want to feel wanted, not like a chore, not like a duty, like a woman." He searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt, of fear. "I am not a gentleman, Lydia," he warned, his voice low and guttural. It's been a long time. 8 years. I don't know how to be." She didn't flinch. She held his gaze. "I'm not made of glass." His eyes closed. He rested his forehead against hers for a long moment, a gesture of defeat, or perhaps surrender. When he opened them, the anger was gone, replaced by a raw, stark need that matched her own. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing to him. He carried her the 2 steps to her cot and laid her down on the thick, soft bear skin. He didn't undress her. He just lay beside her, his weight making the log bed creak, his body a furnace next to hers. He kissed her again, harder this time, a claim. His hands moved over her, rough, possessive, learning the shape of her through the thin wool of her mended dress. She responded with a desperate, clumsy urgency, her hands pulling at his heavy shirt, fumbling with the rawhide laces. She wanted his skin. She wanted to feel him. He helped her, his breathing ragged. He pulled the shirt off over his head, his chest massive and shadowed in the firelight. It was covered in old scars. He loomed over her. "Lydia," he whispered, a final warning, a last chance. "Yes," she breathed. "Please." His hand went to her skirt, pushing the heavy wool up her thighs. His fingers brushed the bare, sensitive skin above her stockings. She gasped. It was real. This was happening. He moved between her legs, settling his weight. He was heavy, solid. He fumbled with his own trousers, his breath hot on her neck. She was ready. She was aching for it. She wanted to wipe away the memory of John, of the angry, fruitless work. He entered her, and Lydia froze. It was not him, it was the act. It was the memory, sharp as a blade, of pain, of duty, of being used by a man who hated her. Her body, which had been soft and open, went rigid as ironwood. Boone stopped, instantly. He hadn't even pushed fully inside. He was still, his muscles corded. "Lydia?" She couldn't breathe. The cabin was spinning. It wasn't Boone. It was John, his face cruel in the dark. It was the doctor, his hands cold. It was the pain. "No," she whimpered, her hands flying up to push against his massive chest. "No, stop." She began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shaking that started in her belly and spread to her limbs. "Please stop," she whispered. The words choked, frantic. "I can only take 3 inches in because—" She couldn't finish. She turned her head away, burying her face in the fur, and a terrible, dry sob tore out of her. I'm sorry, I'm broken. Oh, God, I'm so broken." Boone was out of her, instantly. He didn't curse, he didn't sigh in frustration. He didn't move. Lydia curled into a tight ball, shaking, waiting for the anger, for him to get up and leave, to tell her how useless she truly was. Instead, the cot shifted. He was up. She heard him move. She braced herself. But then she felt the heavy wolf pelts from his own bed piling on top of her. 1, then 2, heavy, warm. The cot sagged again. He sat on the edge, his back to her, a solid, silent wall, guarding her. He just sat. He didn't touch her. He just stayed. After a long time, her sobbing quieted to shivers. He still didn't speak. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't ask why. His silence was a question. "What do you need?" I... She stammered into the dark, her voice muffled by the fur. After After the baby, the doctor, he used tools to clean me out. It hurt. And when he didn't care that it hurt, he said I was just tight. He said, shh. The word was rough, but it was absolute. Stop, don't. He didn't need the details. He understood. His eyes, fixed on the dying fire, were full of a cold, killing rage. But it wasn't for her. It was for the men who had put this fear in her. He finally turned. He didn't try to lie down. He didn't try to kiss her. He just reached out and put his hand on her head, his fingers splaying through her hair. He held her head, a gesture that was almost paternal, anchoring her. I'll wait, he said, his voice a low, rough promise. Lydia looked at him, her eyes swollen, her body aching with shame. He met her gaze. His face was hard, but his eyes were steady, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he meant it. Sleep, he said. He removed his hand, stoked the fire, and went to his own cold bed of furs by the door. But this time, he didn't turn his back to her. He lay facing her cot, his rifle beside him, watching over her in the dark. January bled into February. The deep winter settled onto the mountain, a heavy, silencing weight. The cold was a physical presence, a thing that waited outside the door, seeping through the walls, turning every nailhead in the cabin white with frost. The sun was a rare visitor, a weak light that skimmed the southern ridge for a few hours before vanishing, leaving the world to the blue and the gray. But inside the small cabin, something was shifting. The cold was outside, but the warmth was building. Lydia was no longer a ghost. The woman Boone had dragged from the snow was gone, replaced by someone else. The hollows in her cheeks had filled. Her skin, still pale, now had a healthy, wind-scoured flush. Her hair, which she now washed with harsh lye soap and brushed by the fire, was thick and glossy. The true change was not in her body, but in her bones. She was stronger. She took over the tasks Boone had taught her, and then she took over new ones. She learned to read the silence of the woods. She learned to keep the fire perfectly, banking the coals at night so a single breath would wake them. She learned to use the hatchet. Her first few swings were still clumsy, but the fear was gone, replaced by a grim, satisfying determination. The thwack of her axe splitting a log was a sound of survival. She was still clumsy. She was not made for this life, but she was stubborn. One afternoon, she decided to make biscuits. Boone had a small sack of flour, precious as gold, that he'd been hoarding. While he was out checking the far traps, she mixed it with snow water, salt, and a pinch of soda. She had no lard, so she used rendered bear fat. When Boone returned, the cabin was thick with black, acrid smoke. Lydia was waving a piece of canvas, coughing, her face smeared with soot, tears of frustration in her eyes. In the skillet sat 3 charred, rock-hard lumps. Boone stood at the door, taking in the scene. The smoke, her furious, filthy face, the ruined flour. Lydia braced herself. She expected the quiet, cold rage she had seen him aim at the world. She expected him to yell, to curse the waste. "Well, hell," she muttered, kicking the skillet. "I was just trying to—" Boone looked at the black biscuits, then at her. His face remained hard, but the corners of his mouth twitched. It was a strange, unfamiliar movement. "Looks like you killed him twice," he growled. Lydia stared at him. Then, a sound she hadn't made in years bubbled up in her chest. It was a short, rusty bark. A laugh. She laughed, covering her sooty mouth, her shoulders shaking. And Boone smiled. It was barely a smile, more a crack in the granite of his face, but it transformed him. It lit his gray eyes, chasing the shadows. The sight of it stole her breath. The smile vanished as quickly as it came, but the air was different. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer the empty, cold silence of two strangers waiting out a storm. It became a shared silence, a comfortable wait. They could sit for hours, him mending a trap, her mending his shirt, this time with threads she had painstakingly unraveled from a worn blanket, and not feel the need to speak. The arguments began. They were small, but they were signs of life. "You're favoring that foot," he grunted one evening, watching her limp after a day of chopping wood. "I'm not," she snapped, rubbing her shin. "I'm just cold." "You're favoring it. You'll pull something in your back. Sit, I'll get the wood." "I'm not an invalid. Boone, I can carry my own weight." "I didn't say you were. I said you're limping. Stop being a fool." "You stop being a bear," she shot back. He froze, surprised by her fire. He looked at her, this small, defiant woman, and gave a sharp nod. "Fine, be a fool." He went back to his work, but he watched her. He was making room for her. It started with a shelf. He had 3, running the length of one wall, cluttered with traps, tools, jars of grease, and boxes of lead shot. One morning, he cleared the bottom one. He took everything off it, piled it under his bed of furs, and wiped the rough plank clean with his sleeve. "For your things," he said, not looking at her. She had no things, only the mended, shrunken dress she'd arrived in, which was now clean and folded. She put it on the shelf. The empty space looked vast. Then came the bed. Her cot was narrow, the ropes biting into her back even through the pelts. She woke stiff and sore every morning. Boone disappeared for 2 full days, working outside. She heard the sound of his axe and his saw, a steady, rhythmic labor. She assumed he was building a new trap or a shed for the wood. On the 3rd evening, he came in, his shoulders covered in sawdust. "Need you to go out," he said. "It's dark, Boone, and it must be 10 degrees. Just go, down by the creek. Wait till I call you." Confused and irritated, Lydia pulled on the heavy coat he'd given her, one of Sarah's, a thing that had first felt like a shroud but now felt like a kindness, and walked out into the freezing starlit night. She waited, her breath pluming, listening to the ice crackle on the creek. She heard scraping, thumping, and a few low curses from the cabin. "All right," he yelled. When she returned, the cot was gone. In its place, tucked into the warmest corner by the hearth, was a bed. It was a real bed, with a frame made of thick, yellow pine, sanded almost smooth. It had a headboard. He had even carved a simple, faint flower into the center of it, a clumsy, childish-looking thing that was so full of tenderness it made her throat ache. The mattress was a thick canvas tick, stuffed so full of fresh pine boughs and dry grasses that the sharp, clean smell filled the entire cabin. Lydia stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Boone was standing by the fire, his back to her, pretending to be busy. He was deeply, profoundly embarrassed. "Cut was no good," he grunted. "Ropes were breaking. This'll hold better." She walked to it. She touched the wood. It was solid, sturdy. He had built it to last. She turned to him. He was a huge, frightening man. He had killed, she had no doubt. His hands were stained and scarred, and he had carved her a flower. She didn't thank him. The words were too small. She just walked to him, stood on her toes, and kissed him on his rough, bearded cheek. He froze, rigid as the iron kettle, his face burning red. He didn't speak. He just took his rifle down, went outside, and began to chop wood in the dark, the furious, steady thwack of his axe echoing off the frozen mountain. It was 2 weeks later that the coffee ran out, then the salt. "We need to go to town," Lydia said. Boone stopped sharpening his knife. "No, we're out of salt. The meat won't keep, and you're out of coffee, which is making you meaner than usual." "I ain't mean, and we don't need 'em." "Boone, we need supplies. We need powder and lead if we're to get through to spring." You said so yourself. He was silent. He knew she was right. I ain't taking you down there, he said, his voice flat. I'll go. You stay. I am not a dog to be left tied, she said, her voice quiet but fierce. I am not your prisoner, and I'm not afraid of that town. Not anymore. She held his gaze. Besides, I need thread, a real needle, and I'm going to buy them myself. He stared at her for a long time, a battle waging behind his eyes. He saw the woman she had become, strong, defiant, and whole. He couldn't protect her by hiding her. Fine, he growled. Tomorrow. But you stay close. You don't talk to no one. And you do what I say. The walk down the mountain was the opposite of her climb up. She was strong, her legs sure on the packed snow of the trail Boone had cut. She wore a pair of his old wool trousers, tied with a rope, and the heavy fur-lined coat. She felt armed. Dead Mule Pass looked just as ugly as she remembered, a dirty smear in the snow. Boone, carrying a heavy pack of prime pelts, set a hard pace. He didn't look at her, but she could feel his awareness, a tense, coiled spring beside her. As they hit the main street, the town noticed them. A woman in a red dress, one of the saloon girls, was sweeping the porch of the gilded cage. She saw Boone first. Then her eyes widened when she saw Lydia. She ducked back inside. Seconds later, 2 more faces appeared, pressed against the dirty glass, whispering. Lydia lifted her chin, her gaze fixed straight ahead. They went to the general store first. The same gray-bearded man was at his ledger. He looked up, his eyes narrowing at Boone, then flicking to Lydia with cold disdain. Boone, he grunted, a grudging welcome. Silas, Boone replied. He unwrapped his pack, tossing the pelts onto the counter. Need powder, lead, a sack of flour, salt, coffee. While the 2 men haggled, their voices a low, masculine rumble. Lydia moved through the store. It was so warm, so full of things. Bolts of cloth, tins of peaches, barrels of crackers. She found a small wooden box with needles and 3 spools of thread. She clutched them, her first possession. As she turned, the storekeeper, Silas, was watching her. His sneer was open, ugly. Finding the mountain air agreeable, are we? He asked, his voice oily. Boone's hospitality is known to be rough. Lydia felt a flush of anger. It's better than the street. Mr. Silas. Silas chuckled. Boone shot him a look that silenced him. They finished their trade. Boone packed the heavy supplies into his bag. Go outside, he said to Lydia. Boone. Go on, wait by the door. She obeyed. She stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cold air, trying to shake off the store's suffocating judgment. The street was quiet. Well, now, look what the mountain coughed up. The voice came from the alley between the store and the saloon. Lydia froze. Sheriff Harding stepped out, blocking her way. He was a big man, not as tall as Boone, but wide, his gut pushing against a stained wool coat. He had a tin star pinned to it, and a mean, wet mouth. He was the man she had begged for help, the man who had offered her a warm cell in exchange for accommodation. Sheriff, she said, her voice tight. Ma'am. He mocked a tip of his hat. He smiled, showing yellowed teeth. You look a lot warmer than when I last saw you. Plump, even. Heard Boone was keeping a pet, but I didn't figure it was you. Excuse me, Lydia said, trying to push past him. He blocked her, his body a wall of sour wool and tobacco. He grabbed her arm. His grip was tight, bruising. What's your hurry? He sneered, pulling her closer. Towns missed you. I missed you. Could have kept you warm myself. Right here. Would have been a damn sight softer than that trapper's floor. His thumb rubbed the inside of her arm, a vile, suggestive motion. Lydia's blood ran cold. The old fear, the sickness, the feeling of being trapped, it all came rushing back. She was weak again. She was useless. Let go of me. Or what? He laughed. You gonna scream? Go on. No one here cares. Get your hand off her. The voice was not a shout. It was low, dead, and colder than the wind. Boone stood at the corner of the porch. He had dropped his pack. His hands were empty, his right hand hovering just above the long knife sheathed at his belt. Sheriff Harding let go of Lydia, shoving her back. He hitched his gun belt. Just welcoming the lady to town. Boone, no need to get uncivil. I said, Boone repeated, taking one slow step forward. Get your hand off her. I already did, Harding said, his confidence wavering. He was a bully, but he wasn't a fool. He saw the look in Boone's eyes. It was not anger. It was a flat, empty promise of death. She with you now? Harding tried to swagger. You her man? She's with me, Boone said. And you ain't gonna talk to her? You ain't gonna look at her? You ain't gonna breathe her air again? That a threat, Trapper? It's a fact, Boone said. The two men stared at each other for a long, frozen minute. The street was dead silent. Lydia could see Boone's hand, his knuckles white, his thumb slowly stroking the antler handle of his knife. Harding broke first. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow near Lydia's feet. She's ruined goods anyway. Boone, have at her. He turned, hitched his shoulders, and sauntered back toward the saloon. Boone did not move until the saloon doors swung shut. He stood there, vibrating with a rage so profound it seemed to make the air shake. Boone, Lydia whispered. She was trembling. He turned to her, his face a mask of stone. He looked at her arm, where the sheriff had grabbed her. Then he picked up his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and jerked his head toward the mountain. We're leaving. The walk back up was silent. Boone set a punishing pace, climbing without stopping, his fury a tangible thing radiating from his back. Lydia had to almost run to keep up. She was exhausted, her legs burning, her arm throbbing. But it was not her own fear that choked her. It was his, the sheer, violent, protective power of it. They were halfway up the trail when he finally spoke, his voice ragged. I'll kill that man if he ever touches you again. Lydia stopped, breathing hard. She looked at his back. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and sudden, freezing on her cheeks. She started to cry, a quiet, hopeless sound. Boone spun around, his face dark with confusion and a new anger. What? Did he hurt you? Did he do more than grab you? No, she wept, shaking her head. Then what? What's the matter with you? No one, she choked, the words torn out of her. No one has ever done that for me. He stared at her, his rage faltering. My husband, she said, wiping her face with a frozen glove. If a man had looked at me wrong, John would have said I invited it. He would have blamed me. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and shining with tears. No one has ever defended me. Boone's expression crumpled. The killing rage drained away, leaving him looking lost, his face ravaged by an emotion he didn't understand. He took a step toward her, his hand half raised, as if to comfort her, but he didn't know how. He let it drop. He just stood there, watching her cry, until she was finished. Come on, he said, his voice softer, rough with feeling. Let's go home. That night, the cabin was a fortress. Boone barred the door, something she had never seen him do. He cleaned his rifle for an hour, the metallic shing-shing of the cleaning rod the only sound. Lydia sat on her new bed, holding the small box of needles and thread. She had faced the town. She had faced the sheriff. And Boone had stood for her. He was not a good man. He was not a gentleman, but he was her man. She stood up. He stopped cleaning, watching her. She walked to him, to where he sat on his stool, the gun parts laid out before him. She knelt in front of him, between his powerful, spread knees. "Lydia," he said, his voice a warning. He thought she was just grateful. She silenced him. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart, feeling the steady, heavy beat. "Boone." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the hesitant, exploratory kiss from before. This was a kiss of choice, of strength. She kissed him with all the gratitude, all the fear, and all the new, fierce life inside her. He groaned, a low sound deep in his chest. His hands, smelling of gun oil, came up to grip her arms. "Lydia, don't," he whispered, his voice full of pain. "After today, you're shaken. This ain't—" "This is," she said, pulling back just enough to look him in the eye. "This is exactly what I want. I am not afraid, not of him, and not of you." She kissed him again, her mouth surer this time. He surrendered. With a rough sound, he set the rifle aside, his hands moving to her, gripping her waist, pulling her onto his lap. He carried her to the new bed, his bed, their bed. He laid her down on the fragrant pine boughs, the firelight painting them both in shades of orange and red. He was slow. He was deliberate. He was watching her, his gray eyes dark and intent, searching her face for any sign of the old fear. He undressed her, his rough hands fumbling with the buttons of her shirt, his touch reverent. He undressed himself, his scarred, powerful body unfolding in the small space. He lay beside her, propped on one arm, and just looked at her. He touched her face, her hair, her shoulder, as if seeing her for the first time. When he finally moved over her, she trembled. The memory was still there, the phantom pain, the shame. Her body tensed, an old, broken instinct. She whispered, "Wait!" He stopped. Instantly. He went rigid, his whole body still, his eyes full of anguish. "Lydia, I'm sorry." He started to pull away. "No," she said, her hands flying up to grip his arms, his muscles hard as rock. Don't stop. Just slow. Please, stay with me." It was her choice, her defiance. She was claiming this, claiming him. He looked at her, his breathing ragged. He nodded. He was slow, so slow. He was careful, but he was not gentle. He was heavy and real and hot. He was everything John had not been. He was present. He kissed her, his mouth covering hers as he finally pushed, slowly, past the fear, past the memory, past the old pain. Lydia cried out, a small, sharp sound. But it was not pain. It was release. It was the breaking of a dam. He held her. He held her through the night, long after the fire had burned down to embers. He wrapped his body around hers, his arms a shield, and for the first time since she was a girl, Lydia slept without fear. She woke to the gray light of dawn, tangled in his arms and legs. His heavy arm was draped over her waist, his bearded face buried in her hair, his breath warm on her neck. She felt whole, not fixed, not new, but pieced back together. She lay still, listening to him breathe, feeling the solid, living warmth of him. "I thought I was broken," she whispered, not knowing if he was awake. He stirred, his grip tightening on her. "You ain't," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "No," she said, a tear of gratitude sliding into her hair. "I thought I was, but you didn't try to fix me." She turned in his arms to face him, his eyes slowly opening, gray and clear in the morning light. "You just stayed." They had 3 days of peace, 3 days where the world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, to the scent of pine smoke and the heat of the fire. 3 days where the ghost of Sheriff Harding, the whispers of the town, seemed to sink beneath the heavy, muffling snow. Boone was teaching her to read the tracks near the creek. He knelt, pointing with a gloved finger at a delicate, precise pattern. "Martin," he said, his voice a low rumble in the cold air. "Sly. Hard to trap, but the pelt, prime." Lydia was listening, truly listening. When the sound came, it was not a sound of the woods. It was the jingle of metal, the labored breathing of horses, the crunch of snow under heavy hooves. Boone was on his feet before she had even processed the noise. He did not look alarmed. He looked finished. He was a man who had been waiting for a boot to drop, and it had finally fallen. His hand went to the knife at his belt. "Go inside. Lydia, bar the door." "Boone. Now." His voice was flat. He pulled his rifle from where it leaned against a tree and moved with a predator's silence toward the edge of the clearing, vanishing behind a thicket of snow-heavy spruce. Lydia ran. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She stumbled into the cabin, her hands shaking so badly she could barely lift the thick wooden bar. She dropped it into place, the thud sounding terribly final. She ran to the small, grimy window, rubbing the frost away to see. 3 riders emerged from the trees. Sheriff Harding was in the lead, his bulk overflowing his saddle. He was flanked by 2 other men, deputies. They looked younger, nervous, their eyes scanning the trees, their rifles held awkwardly across their laps. They looked like town men, not mountain men, and they looked cold. Harding reined in, 20 yards from the cabin door. He stared at the silent, smoking chimney, his face red with the cold and a sour anger. "Boone!" he bellowed. The name was swallowed by the vast, snowy silence. "I know you're in there, you damned hermit. Come on out. I got official business." Silence. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. "Don't make me angry. Boone, I'm here on authority of the Idaho Territory." Lydia watched, her knuckles pressed against her mouth. She couldn't see Boone. He was gone. "Fine," Harding shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm here for the woman, Lydia. She's wanted for questioning." Lydia's stomach turned to ice. "Questioning about what?" Boone's voice came from everywhere at once. It echoed off the rock face behind the cabin, making the deputies jump in their saddles. Harding spun his horse, searching the trees. "Show yourself, damn you! This ain't a game!" "Answer the question, Sheriff," Boone's voice boomed. Harding sneered, realizing he had the authority, even if Boone had the position. "Silas, at the general store. He signed a complaint. Says the woman stole goods from his store, needles, thread. Says she's a common thief." Lydia gasped. The lie was so blatant, so cruel. She had held them in her hand, but Boone's pelts had paid for them. "You're a liar, Harding," Boone's voice called out, closer this time, from the rocks to the left. "Don't matter what I am," Harding shouted, his confidence returning. He had the law. "I got a warrant right here. I'm taking her in, now. You send her out, or we come in and get her." "She ain't going," Boone said. It was not a discussion. It was a fact. "That's obstructing," Harding yelled, his face turning purple. "That's resisting. You want to hang for a ruined whore? Boone, is that it?" The 2 deputies shifted, their horses stamping nervously. "Last chance," Harding said, pulling his pistol from its holster. "Send her out." "You come 1 step closer," Boone's voice said, now calm, clear, and coming from directly in front of them, though he was still unseen. "And I'll put a bullet through that tin star, then I'll take the horses. Your boys can walk back, if they make it." The threat hung in the freezing air. The deputies looked at each other. This was not what they signed up for. This was not arresting a drunk. This was dying on a cold mountain for a man they didn't even like. "He's bluffing," Harding hissed at them, but he didn't move his horse forward. "Am I?" Boone asked. Harding stared at the silent cabin, at the woods that had turned against him. He was beaten. For now. "This ain't over. Boone!" he spat, shoving his pistol back into his holster. "You're defying the law. I'll be back. And I won't just bring 2 men. I'll bring a posse. We'll burn you out, you hear me? We'll burn that shack to the ground with you both in it." He yanked his horse's head around, spraying snow. "Come on!" The three of them rode away. Their retreat hurried, almost panicked. Lydia watched until their backs disappeared into the pines. She sagged against the wall, her legs giving out. The bar on the door lifted from the outside, a simple trick of a hidden latch she'd never known about. Boone stepped in. He was covered in snow, his rifle in his hand, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He didn't look at her. He kicked the door shut and, for the first time, dropped the bar on the inside. He walked to the window, staring out at the tracks in the snow. "He'll be back," Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. "He meant it. A posse." "I know," Boone said. He set his rifle down and picked up his axe. He went to the woodpile inside the cabin and began to split rounds, not for the fire, but for something else. He worked with a grim, focused energy. "What are you doing?" "Shutters," he grunted. "Thwack. Window's a weakness. Thwack. And we need more water. Melt snow. He'll come back before the next storm. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after." Lydia watched him. The reality of it was sinking in. He was fortifying. He was preparing for a siege, for a gunfight. He was going to die. He was going to die, for her, for ruined goods. The old, cold voice returned to her, the voice of her husband, of the widow in town. Useless, broken. She had brought death to the one man who had shown her kindness. She was a blight, a curse. She watched him for an hour. He worked without stopping. He took the boards from her new bed, the bed he had built her, and began measuring them against the window. He was sacrificing the one gentle thing in the cabin to prepare for war. She couldn't let him. She waited until he went back outside, his rifle slung over his shoulder, to check the perimeter, to find a better firing position. The moment the door closed, she moved. She had nothing. She grabbed the thin wool dress she had arrived in, shoving it into a small canvas sack he used for traps. She took the needles and thread. She found a heel of bread, hard as rock, and a strip of dried meat. It was enough. She would go. She would go down the mountain. She would walk into the woods and keep walking until the cold took her. It was better than him dying. It was better than watching them burn this place, this home. She was tying the sack, her hands fumbling, tears blurring her vision. When the door crashed open, Boone stood there, his chest heaving, his face dark with a terrifying, new emotion. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, profound hurt that looked more like rage than any sadness she had ever seen. He looked at her, then he looked at the sack in her hands. "What are you doing?" he whispered. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "I'm leaving," Lydia said, her voice shaking, but she stood tall. I won't let you die for me." "Leave." "He'll kill you, Boone. He'll bring 12 men. They'll burn you out. You heard him. I am not worth your life." "You think you get to decide that?" he roared, taking a step toward her. He was the mountain bear now, wounded and furious. "I'm not worth any life," she cried, the words tearing out of her. "Don't you understand? I'm the woman who was cast out. I'm the one who brings nothing. I brought this trouble to your door. If I'm gone, he'll just go away." "He won't," Boone said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl. "He'll hunt you, and when he finds you, he'll do what he wants, and then he'll leave you in the snow. Is that what you want? Is that what you think you deserve?" "It's better than you dying." He crossed the room in one stride and grabbed her. His hands clamped down on her shoulders, shaking her, not in violence, but in a desperate, frantic attempt to make her understand. "You think that," he snarled, gesturing to the door, to the woods, "is better? You think me living here, alone, knowing I let you walk out? That's better, you fool, you blind, stupid fool." I won't be the reason, she sobbed, hitting his chest, her blows weak, pathetic. I can't. I won't be your death. I am ruined. He said it. It's true. Stop, he commanded, his grip tightening. Stop saying that. It is true. Then what am I? He roared, his face inches from hers. What am I? I'm the man who let his wife and sons die. I'm the man who hid on this mountain for 8 years. I was dead. Lydia, I was a ghost. I was just waiting. Do you understand? He shook her again. I already got hurt. Lydia stared at him, her tears freezing. What? His voice broke, the rage cracking, showing the raw, agonizing grief beneath. I already got hurt. When you walked into the snow alone, when I found you, the moment I carried you in here, I was done. It was over. You think Harding, you think a bullet, you think that hurts? He let go of her, pushing her away as if she burned him. He turned, his back to her. His massive shoulders slumped. He braced his hands against the cabin wall. I was safe, he whispered, his voice ragged. I was cold. I was empty. And it was safe. Then you came. You, with your fear and your damn stubbornness. He hit the wall, a single dull thud that shook the cabin. You came in, and you made me feel. He turned to face her, his eyes ravaged, his face a mask of pain. So you go on, you walk out that door, and you kill me. You kill me right now, because that's what it is. You leaving is me dying, not Harding, not the fire. You! Lydia stood, rooted to the floor, the sack falling from her hand. She saw it all, the 8 years of solitude, the unbearable, crushing weight of his guilt. He hadn't just saved her from the snow, she had saved him from the silence. She took a step, then another. She walked to him, this huge, broken, terrifying man. She did not cry. Her fear was gone, burned away by his confession. She stood in front of him and slowly, deliberately, put her small, chapped hands on his chest. I'll stay, she whispered. He looked down at her, his breathing ragged. I'll stay, she said again, her voice stronger. But you have to promise me something. What? We live, we don't die here. Boone, we fight, and we live. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the steel that had brought her up the mountain, the strength that had survived her husband, the fire that he had, himself, helped to stoke. He covered her hands with his own. All right, he said. We live. The fight was gone, replaced by a cold, grim purpose. Then we prepare, she said. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic, silent work. The truce between them was sealed. They were a team. Can you shoot? He asked. My father taught me, a little, a squirrel rifle. He nodded. He took down his second rifle, a lighter Winchester. It's loaded, 7 shots. You aim center mass. You don't aim for the head, you aim for the chest. And you don't pull the trigger. You squeeze it. Slow. He handed it to her. It was heavy, the wood smooth, the metal cold and smelling of oil. It felt real. Where do I go? The bed. He pointed to the new, pine-scented bed he had built. It's in the corner. Good angle on the door. You stay there. You stay down. You don't shoot unless they're inside. You understand? Inside. Yes. He went back to work. He finished nailing the thick boards over the window, plunging the cabin into a near-total darkness, lit only by the fire and the 2 tallow candles. He reinforced the door with his heavy workbench. He went outside, and Lydia watched him through the gaps in the door. He was moving his traps, the big iron-toothed bear traps. He was digging them into the snow on the main path, covering them with a light dusting, his movements quick and expert. He was turning the mountain itself into a weapon. He came back in, his face set. He brought in the last of the firewood, stacking it high. He filled every pot, every bucket. with water melted from the snow. "They'll try to burn us," he said, his voice flat. "They'll shoot at the chimney first, then the roof." "What do we do?" "We wait. I'll take the first shots. From the high rock, it'll scatter 'em. Make 'em come on foot. Then they hit the traps. Then I come back, and we fight from here." He pointed to the back wall, where a few boards looked looser than the others. "That's the way out. If it goes bad, it leads to the creek bed. You run. You follow it down. You don't stop." "You mean we run," she corrected him. He looked at her, and a small, hard smile touched his mouth. "Yeah, we run." Night fell. The cabin was a fortress. It was dark, hot, and smelled of fear and pine. Every sound from outside, the snap of a frozen branch, the moan of the wind, made them both flinch. They were done. There was nothing left to do but wait for dawn. They sat at the small table, the 2 candles guttering. Boone was cleaning his rifle for the 10th time. Lydia was running her thumb over the smooth stock of her own. "Boone," she said, her voice quiet. He looked up. "I'm afraid." "Good," he said. "Afraid keeps you low. Afraid keeps you sharp." "No," she said. "I'm not afraid of them. Not really." She looked at him. "I'm afraid of after, or of no after." He put his cleaning rod down. He understood. This was their last night on earth. He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was rough, enveloping. "Me too," he whispered. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow on the roof. She stood up. She blew out one candle, then the other. The cabin was plunged into darkness, lit only by the red, pulsing glow of the fire's embers. She walked to the new bed. She heard him stand, his stool scraping the floor. She turned to him. He was a massive, dark shape against the red glow. "Lydia," he started, his voice thick. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't talk." She went to him. She stood in front of him and, with trembling fingers, began to unlace the rawhide ties of his shirt. He let her. His body was rigid, his breath held. This was not like before. This was not about fear, or comfort, or even passion. This was about life. It was a desperate, defiant act against the morning. It was an anchor. She pushed the heavy shirt off his shoulders. She put her cold hands on his hot, scarred chest. "I want all of you, Boone," she whispered, her voice fierce, trembling. "Tonight, before, I don't want to be afraid. Not of this, not anymore. I don't care if it hurts." He made a sound, a low groan of pain and love, and his arms came around her, crushing her to him. He buried his face in her hair. "It won't," he promised, his voice ragged. "Never again. I'll never hurt you." He lifted her, carrying her to the bed, laying her on the soft, fragrant boughs. He was not the hesitant, uncertain man from before, and he was not the rough, wild man of the mountain. He was something new. He was slow, but not hesitant. He was careful, but with a deep, burning intensity. He worshipped her with his hands, with his mouth, his touch both a promise and a farewell. He was memorizing her. And she was fearless. She met his desperation with her own. She pushed past the old, cold memories, claiming him, claiming her own body, her own desire. They moved together, a silent, desperate prayer in the dark. And when they finally came together, when he filled her, he was crying. She felt his tears, hot on her neck. He was weeping for his wife, for his sons, for the 8 years of lonely, cold guilt, and for her. And she cried with him. She wept for her lost child, for her cold husband, for the woman who had stumbled into the snow to die, and for the life, the fierce, beautiful, terrifying life she had found in this man's arms. They clung to each other, 2 broken halves made whole, their bodies slick with sweat, their tears mingling. The only sound in the fortified cabin, their ragged, shared breath. They lay tangled together for hours, waiting. The red glow of the fire faded to gray ash. The cold began to seep back into the room. Dawn was coming. Lydia lay with her head on his chest, her hand over his heart, feeling it beat, strong and steady. "Boone," she whispered into the dark. "I'm here. If we live." "When we live," he corrected her, his voice a low, iron promise. She smiled. "When we live. What? What happens?" He was silent for a long time. She felt him thinking, feeling the words. He shifted, pulling the furs up over her shoulders. "This cabin," he said, his voice rough. It's just a box. It's a place to stay alive. It's not enough." He kissed the top of her head. "I want to build a home. Lydia, down in the valley, by the water. A place with real windows, and a garden." He tightened his grip on her, pulling her so close she could barely breathe. "A cabin isn't enough," he whispered, his voice thick with a future he was terrified they wouldn't see. "I want a home, with you in it." The dawn broke gray and bitter. The light was thin, just a dilution of the night, offering no warmth. Inside the black, fortified cabin, Lydia and Boone waited. They had not slept. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, the two rifles cold in their laps. Every snap of a frozen branch, every gust of wind against the new boarded window, made Lydia jump. Boone was still. He was a piece of the mountain, a stone waiting for the avalanche. The sound, when it came, was unmistakable. It was not 3 horses. It was more. The crunch of hooves on the trail was heavy, labored. "He's here," Lydia whispered. Boone said nothing. He checked the load in his rifle, his one good hand moving with fluid grace. He stood, went to the door, and listened. He looked at Lydia, his gray eyes clear and hard. "Stay at the bed. Stay low. No matter what you hear, not until they are inside." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She scrambled to the pine bed, her new bed, which had become her fortress. She lay flat, pushing the muzzle of the Winchester through a small, carved gap between the logs. Boone moved to a different spot, a peephole he had drilled near the door. "5 of them," he murmured. "Harding, and 4 others, hired guns, not deputies." "Boone!" The shout was familiar, but this time it was triumphant. "I'm back, you son of a bitch! And I got 5 rifles this time, and a warrant." Boone watched, silent. "I got a warrant for the woman, Lydia, for theft, and I got a warrant for you, Boone, for obstruction of the law and threatening an officer." Harding was playing it smart this time. He had the paper. "We're coming in, Boone. You send her out, or we burn you out." Lydia watched Boone. He was calculating. He was not going to his rock. He was staying. He was protecting the door. "You ain't taking her, Harding," Boone's voice boomed, muffled by the thick logs. "And you ain't setting foot in this cabin." "That's it," Harding roared. "Light the damn roof. The rest of you, watch the door." There was a scuffle outside. Shouts, then a new sound, a sharp, metallic snap. It was followed by a scream, a high, terrible animal sound of pure agony. "My leg! God almighty, my leg!" Lydia gasped. "The bear trap." "He trapped the path," Harding yelled, his voice now laced with panic. "He trapped us! Watch yourselves! He's a damn savage!" "Hold your fire," one of the other men yelled. "Jed's caught! He's bleeding bad!" "Leave him!" Harding shrieked. "The cabin! Watch the cabin!" There was a thwack as something heavy hit the door. An axe. They were trying to break it down. "Thwack! Thwack!" Lydia's hands were sweating, her finger tight on the trigger. She aimed at the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Not until they're inside. Thwack! A different sound, A single rifle shot, deafening, from the front of the cabin. It was Boone. He had fired through a slot. A grunt. "He hit me! Son of a—" Thwack! Thwack! The axe was relentless. Then, gunfire erupted from outside. 2, 3, 4 shots, all hammering into the front of the cabin. Wood splintered. One bullet sang through the air over Lydia's head, ricocheting off the iron stove with a high ping. She squeezed her eyes shut, held her breath. Boone was firing again. A measured shot, then another. He was not wasting ammunition. He was making every shot count. "He's just one man," Harding was screaming. "Rush the damn door! Rush him!" But the trap and Boone's accuracy had broken their nerve. "You rush it! Sheriff!" one of the men yelled back. "I ain't dying for this." "Cowards, Harding's voice was cut off. Lydia heard a new sound, a heavy, wet thud against the door, followed by a grunt. "Boone," she whispered, terrified. "Stay down," he growled, but his voice was tight, strained. "What was it? Are you hit?" "Stay down." The axe blows stopped. There was frantic shouting. "He's hit! Harding's hit! I'm getting out of here." "Me too! This ain't worth it! The man's crazy!" "Jed's bleeding out! Grab him! Grab the sheriff!" Lydia heard the sounds of men scrambling, panicked, dragging heavy weights through the snow. Horses wheeled, screaming in the cold. And then, silence. A silence more profound, more terrifying than the gunfire. She waited. 1 minute, 2. "Boone?" No answer. "Boone!" She scrambled from the bed, her rifle clattering to the floor. He was slumped against the wall, near the door. His left arm, the one he'd been shot in before, was hanging limp, but it was his right shoulder. His right shoulder was a dark, wet ruin of blood and shredded buckskin. An axe was embedded in the thick log wall, just above where he'd been standing. They tried to chop through," he breathed, his face pale, beaded with sweat. "A piece of the log. It blew in, hit me." He was not shot. He was wounded by his own fortification. "They're gone," she whispered, touching his bloody shoulder. "For now," he panted, his good hand gripping the wound. "The one I shot. Harding. It was a leg shot. He ain't dead. He'll be back." Lydia looked at the blood. She looked at the ruined door. She looked at his pale, sweating face. Her promise to him echoed in her ears. "We live." "No," she said. He looked at her, confused. "No more running," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "No more hiding. You said you wanted a home. You can't be a fugitive." "Lydia, they'll hang me. That man, the one in the trap. He's dead or dying. And I shot Harding." "And they'll hang me," she said, her voice rising. "For being a thief, for being with you. We can't win this by hiding. We win this by finishing it." She grabbed a clean rag, pressing it hard against his shoulder. He hissed in pain. "What are you saying?" "We're going down the mountain," she said, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, new resolve. "We're going to town, right now. You're going to tell them what Harding did, and I'm going to tell them what he is." He stared at her as if she were mad. "They'll kill us. They'll kill us if we stay here," she countered, tying the rag tight, her hands covered in his blood. "He'll come back with 20 men. He'll come back with fire. We'll die in this box." She grabbed his good hand. "I would rather die in the light. Boone, telling the truth, than burn in the dark." He searched her face, saw the steel here, the woman she had become. He nodded. "Once. Get the rifle." The walk down to Dead Mule Pass was a waking nightmare. Boone, pale and reeling, leaned heavily on Lydia. He had his knife in his belt, his good arm holding his bleeding shoulder. Lydia carried the Winchester, her eyes scanning the trail, expecting an ambush at every turn. They saw no one. The fleeing posse had left a chaotic trail of blood and abandoned gear. When they emerged onto the main street, the town went dead silent. The saloon doors flew open. Silas, the storekeeper, came out onto his porch. Faces appeared in every window. They were a ghastly sight. Boone, covered in blood, his face a mask of gray pain, and Lydia, smeared with his blood and soot, her dress torn, carrying a rifle like a soldier. "My God," Silas whispered. Sheriff Harding was there. He was sitting in a chair outside his office, his leg propped up, a bloody bandage wrapped around his thigh. The man called Jed was gone. The other 3 survivors were nowhere to be seen. When Harding saw them, his face went from pained to pure, murderous rage. "Arrest them!" he screamed, trying to stand, fumbling for his gun. "Arrest them! They murdered Jed! They shot me! They're murderers!" 2 men, the town blacksmith and a miner, moved to block Boone and Lydia, their faces uncertain. "We're not here to fight," Lydia said, her voice carrying in the cold, still air. She let the rifle slip from her shoulder, holding it by the barrel, pointed at the ground. "We're here for the judge." "Judge?" Harding spat. "I'm the law here." "Judge Miller is in town." The blacksmith grunted, not looking at Harding. "Came in on the morning stage. He's over at the Gilded Cage, handling a land dispute." "Then that's where we're going," Lydia said. She looked at Boone, who was swaying. "He needs a doctor, not a rope." They walked, the crowd parting for them. They left Harding screaming threats from his chair. The Gilded Cage was packed. A thin, stern-looking man in a black suit. Judge Miller sat at a table, looking over a map. He looked up, his expression hardening as they entered. "What in God's name is this?" the judge demanded. "That's Boone," Silas the storekeeper said, pushing in behind them. "The trapper, and that's the woman he's been keepin'." Harding burst in, supported by his one remaining, terrified deputy. "Judge, I demand you arrest this man. He led a war against me and my posse. He murdered Deputy Jedediah Flynn and shot me in the leg, all while resisting a lawful warrant." Judge Miller looked at Boone's bleeding shoulder, then at Harding's leg. "A war, you say? Over what?" "Over her!" Harding pointed a shaking finger at Lydia. "A warrant for theft. She stole from Silas's store." The judge looked at Lydia. "Is this true? Woman, you're a thief." Lydia stood straight. Her voice did not tremble. "No, sir, my name is Lydia. We traded prime pelts for all our supplies. Mr. Silas knows it." All eyes turned to Silas. The storekeeper shuffled, his face pale. He looked at Harding, then at the judge. "Well, they did trade pelts, but—" She took the thread. "Which was paid for in the trade," Boone growled, his voice thick with pain. "The warrant was a lie." "It's not a lie," Harding roared. "She's a vagrant, a whore." "Why would the sheriff serve a false warrant? Mr. Boone?" the judge asked, his eyes sharp. "Because I wouldn't let him have her," Boone said. "Have her?" Lydia stepped forward. The saloon went quiet. "Judge Miller, when I first came to this town months ago, I was starving. I had nowhere to go. I begged Sheriff Harding for help, for a cell, just to be out of the cold." She locked eyes with the judge. "He told me I could have a cell. He told me it would be warm, if I was accommodating." A low murmur went through the crowd. Harding's face went white. "That is a damnable lie," he yelled. "She's a ruined woman, a barren—" "She ain't lying, Judge." The voice came from the back. It was May, the saloon girl who had swept the porch. She pushed her way forward, her face painted, her red dress faded, her hands shaking. "May, you shut your mouth," Harding threatened. "No!" May's voice was suddenly strong. "I won't. I'm tired of it. He's a pig, Judge, And he's been using that badge to get what he wants since he got here." "That's hearsay," Harding shouted. "Is it?" May looked at the crowd. "He did it to me, my first week. He did it to Sally, and he drove Annie clean out of the territory last spring, after he beat her for saying no." The crowd was rumbling now. Other women, a laundress, the widow from the edge of town, were nodding, their faces hard. The quiet support had found its voice. "He's a liar, Judge," May said, pointing at Harding. "That woman ain't no thief, and that trapper, he's just protecting his own. Harding went up there for spite. He went up there for blood. Jed's death is on his hands, not Boone's." Judge Miller stared at Harding, his face like a thundercloud. He looked at the faces in the crowd. He saw no support for the sheriff. He saw only anger and disgust. "Sheriff Harding," the judge said, his voice cold, "you will hand your badge and your weapon to this man." He pointed at the blacksmith. "What, you're taking her word, a whore's word, over mine?" "I'm taking the word of the town," Miller corrected him. "I see no one here who speaks for you. The warrant for theft is dismissed. The charge of murder against Mr. Boone is ruled as self-defense, a defense against a corrupt officer acting with malice and without legal standing." He stood up. "The pursuit is called off. Mr. Boone, you and the woman are free to go." He turned back to Harding, his voice like ice. "Mr. Harding, you have 1 hour to be out of Dead Mule Pass. If you are seen here after that, I will have you arrested for impersonating an officer, for malfeasance, and for the assault of which Miss May speaks." Harding's mouth worked, but no sound came out. He was beaten, defeated by a trapper and 2 women he had called ruined. The blacksmith took his badge. Harding, bleeding, his face a mask of hate, limped out of the saloon, a broken man. The crowd parted for Boone and Lydia. As they reached the door, Silas, the storekeeper, stepped forward, his face ashamed. "Mr. Boone," he stammered, your supplies, they're on the house, for the trouble." Boone just stared at him, his gray eyes cold. He didn't speak. He and Lydia walked out, back into the light. They returned to the cabin. They were free, but they were shaken to their very souls. The walk back up was a blur. Lydia, half carrying Boone, got him inside the ruined cabin. The adrenaline was gone. He collapsed onto the pine bed, the one he had built for her. She looked at his shoulder. The log fragment had been pulled out in the saloon, but the wound was deep, ragged, and full of dirt and splinters. "It's bad, Boone," she whispered. "Clean it," he grunted, his teeth clenched. She did what he had taught her. She boiled water. She washed it with lye soap and salt, her hands shaking as he writhed, biting back screams. She packed it with the last of his healing salve. But it was too late. By nightfall, he was shaking, not from cold, but from a deep, internal fire. The infection had taken hold. Lydia was alone. The nearest doctor was 100 miles away. There was no one. Just her, the mountain, and the man who was burning alive. For 3 days, she fought. He became delirious, a thrashing, wild stranger. He didn't know her. He saw things that weren't there. "Sarah!" he cried out, his voice a raw plea. "Sarah, the smoke!" "I'm coming. Hold the door." Lydia, her face streaked with tears, held him down, her small body braced against his massive, fevered one. "It's Lydia. Boone, I'm here. It's all right. You're safe." "The boys," he moaned, his eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. "Jacob, Eli, run to the creek." "They're safe," she sobbed, sponging his face with snow water. "They're safe. You're safe. Just rest." She did not sleep. She fed the fire. She melted snow. She forced broth and water between his cracked, dry lips. She cleaned the wound, which was now a swollen, weeping mass of red and yellow. It smelled of death. On the third night, she knew she was losing him. His thrashing stopped. He grew quiet. His skin was cold, clammy, but his breath was a shallow, hot puff. He was sinking. He was letting go. Lydia fell apart. She laid her head on his chest, her ear against his ribs, listening to the faint, failing rhythm of his heart. "No," she wept. "No, you don't get to leave me?" She gripped the front of his shirt. "You promised me, Boone. You promised me a home. You promised me windows and a garden. You can't go, not now." She raised her head, her voice a raw whisper in the dark cabin. "You stayed for me. When I was broken, you stayed. Now I'm staying for you. You hear me? I am not letting you go. I won't be alone again. Don't you dare leave me." She held him all night, her own life a cold, tiny flame next to his flickering one. She prayed to a God she no longer believed in. She made bargains with the mountain, with the winter, with death itself. When the first gray light of dawn stole through the cracks in the door, his breathing had not changed. She was weeping, exhausted, her hope gone. Then his good hand, the one not ravaged by the wound, moved. It was a faint twitch. His fingers found her hair. Lydia's head snapped up. Boone's eyes were open. They were not wild. They were not vacant. They were gray and deep. And he was looking at her. He was so weak, his lips could barely move. "Home," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He had survived, but only barely. He closed his eyes, his hands still tangled in her hair, and fell into the first true healing sleep. The fever broke like a dam. One morning, after a night of such profound, cold stillness, Lydia had been sure he was gone. She woke to the sound of his breathing. It was not the shallow, hot rasp of the fever, but a deep, slow, and steady rhythm. His skin was cool. His eyes, when they finally opened, were clear. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, as if remembering how to be in his own body. "Lydia," he whispered. "I'm here," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion and relief. The fire," he mumbled. "It's low." Lydia laughed, a sound that was half a sob. She kissed his forehead, his rough, matted hair. "I'll get it." The mountain thawed. Spring did not arrive gently. It came in a muddy, violent rush. The snow, which had been 5 feet deep, collapsed. The sound of the world was dripping. Water ran in rivulets down the walls, off the roof. The creek behind the cabin turned from a frozen whisper to a dull, angry roar. The air, still cold, now smelled of damp earth and rot, and beneath it all, the sharp, clean scent of new pine buds. Boone's recovery was slow. He was a terrible patient. He was a man built of muscle and granite, and the infection had left him weak as a newborn. He hated it. He hated lying on the bed, her bed, while she did the work. You're not splitting the wood right," he growled at her from the cabin, watching her through the open door. "Then you come do it," she snapped back, not unkindly. She swung the axe, and the log split, messy but effective. "You're favoring your left," he grumbled. "And you're favoring your whole body," she said. "Now rest. I'm making soup." But he let her take care of him. He let her clean the wound, which was a puckered, ugly purple scar on his right shoulder. He let her change the bandages, her touch gentle, efficient. He let her feed him. This, for him, was a deeper intimacy than anything that had come before. It was surrender. When he was finally strong enough to stand, the first thing he did was walk outside, unsteady on his feet, and stare at the cabin. He looked at the boarded window, the axe-scarred door. "It's a box," he said, his voice full of disgust. "It's our home," she said, standing beside him. No, he said. He looked at the stand of pine trees 50 yards away. Not yet. He had promised her a home. The work began. His right arm was still weak, the muscles knotted and stiff. He couldn't lift his rifle, let alone swing his heavy axe. He tried once and nearly fell, his face white with pain and fury. "Damn it," he roared, kicking the log. "Use your left," Lydia said calmly, handing him the smaller hatchet. "Or teach me." So they worked, together. He taught her how to sight a tree, how to make the wedge cut. She was strong now, her body hardened by the winter, and she swung the axe. It was slow, grueling work, but she felled the first tree, and Boone, with his left hand, did the finer work. He sawed the logs, hewing them flat, his movements awkward, clumsy, and full of a dogged, furious determination. Lydia dragged the finished logs to the cabin. They were building. He tore the boards off the window, letting the bright, cool spring light flood the cabin for the first time in weeks. He built a new door, thick and solid. And then he started the addition. He was building her a room, a second room, one with a wide window that would face the south slope, a room that would be a true kitchen, with a new stovepipe, counter space, and shelves. It's too much, Boone," she said one night, rubbing the salve into his aching right shoulder. "Your arm." "A man who can't build a house for his woman ain't much of a man." He grunted, his eyes closed, leaning into her touch. "You're twice the man of anyone I've ever known," she whispered. Arm or no arm. He just grunted again, but his good hand found hers and held it tight. While he built the walls, Lydia reclaimed the earth. Silas, the storekeeper, had sent a peace offering. A few days after the judge left, a mule train arrived, led by the blacksmith. It was loaded with supplies: flour, coffee, salt, sugar, tins of peaches, and 2 new, thick blankets. There was also a small, leather-bound journal and a pencil. Lydia had cried when she saw it. She started writing again, something she hadn't done since she was a girl, before Utah, before her world had shrunk to the size of a sterile bedroom and a husband's disappointment. She didn't write about the past. She didn't write about John, or the baby, or the cold. She wrote, "April 4th, the snow is gone from the south slope. Boone shot a deer. We will eat well tonight." She wrote, "April 10th, he is building the kitchen. The sound of his saw is the only sound. Besides the creak, it is a good sound." She wrote, "April 19th, I saw the first flower, a purple crocus, pushing up through the mud. I showed it to Boone. He grunted. I think he liked it." The partnership that had been forged in survival now softened into one of life. He took her on his trap lines, his right arm now strong enough to carry his rifle. He showed her how to set a snare, how to read the faint, muddy tracks of a fox. She learned to skin a hare, her hands steady, her stomach calm. She respected the work. It was life. It was the food that had kept them from starving. But she brought her own world to the mountain. She found a patch of wildflowers near the creek, tiny white stars and delicate bluebells. She dug them up, carefully, her hands in the rich, cold mud, and replanted them in a patch of sun-scorched earth by the new cabin door. Boone watched her, his arms crossed, a look of profound confusion on his face. That's prime land," he said, gesturing to the spot. "Good for beans. Or potatoes. It's good for this, too," she said, tamping the earth down. "They're useless," he argued, though his voice was soft. "You can't eat 'em. They don't keep you warm." "You can look at them," Lydia said, sitting back on her heels. She looked up at him, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes clear. "And they're not useless. They're a promise. They mean the winter is truly over." Boone stared at the small, fragile plants. He looked at her. He said nothing. He turned, grabbed his axe, and went back to work. But the next morning, Lydia woke to find a small, rough fence, built of willow branches, encircling her garden. He had protected her useless flowers from the deer. The kitchen was finished by May. It was beautiful. It was simple and solid and smelled of fresh-cut pine. It had 2 windows, and the light was everywhere. That night, they sat by the fire in the main cabin. It felt huge now, with the cooking stove and supplies moved to the new room. It was just their room, their bed, the one he had built, and his stool, and a new chair he had made for her. He was watching her. She was writing in her journal, the pencil moving quickly. She looked peaceful. She looked civilized. He felt his own roughness, the scars on his hands, the beard he never trimmed. "You miss it?" he asked, his voice low. Lydia looked up. "Miss what?" "Towns, people, that writing." He gestured to the journal. "Talking to other women, wearing a dress." She looked down at the men's trousers she still wore, tucked into her boots. They were practical. "These are fine." "That ain't what I mean." He leaned forward, his face serious, shadowed. "Silas sent word. The mule train comes twice a month now. The town's growing. They want to buy my pelts. All of them." "That's good," she said, sensing where this was going. "It means we got money, real money. Enough." He took a breath, the words costing him. "We could go. We could sell this place, go to Oregon or back east. If you wanted. I ain't just this mountain. I can farm. I can build." He was giving her a choice. He was giving her an escape. He was testing, in his own rough way, if she was truly here by choice, or if she was just a captive of gratitude. Lydia closed her journal. She looked at this man, at his scarred face, his earnest, worried eyes. She thought of the cold, judgmental parlors of the East. She thought of the dust and the shame of Utah. She thought of the ruined woman who had crawled up this mountain to die. "Back east," she said, her voice quiet. "To what? To them? To the men who call a woman useless because her body fails? To the women who whisper behind their hands?" She shook her head, a slow, sure motion. "This mountain almost killed me. Boone, it took my feet. It took my hope. But it's the only place that ever let me live. It's the only place that didn't care about my past. It just is." She got up from her chair and knelt in front of him, putting her hands on his knees. "You're wrong," she said. "You are this mountain. You're hard, and you're stubborn, and you're dangerous, and you're the only thing that ever felt like home." She looked him in the eye. "This mountain gave me a man and a reason to live. I am not going anywhere." He looked at her, his throat working. He hadn't known he was holding his breath. He let it out, a ragged, shaky sigh. He reached out, his hand going to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He pulled her to him. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the siege. It was not the hesitant, healing kiss that had come before. It was a kiss of knowing. It was slow and deep and confident. It held all the promises he'd made, the garden, the windows, the future. He lifted her, pulling her onto his lap, his mouth never leaving hers. Later, on the pine bed, in the soft, firelit darkness, they came together. There were no ghosts, the shadow of her husband, the specter of his wife. They were gone. They were part of their scars, but they did not rule them. This was not about survival. It was not about need or loneliness. It was, for the first time, purely about love. It was fierce. He was a man who had held back his heart for 8 years, and he was finally, fully, letting go. He gave her everything. His tenderness, his rage, his guilt, his hope. He gave her the man who had wept for his sons, and the man who had built her a fence for her flowers. And she was no longer broken. She was no longer afraid. She met his fierceness with her own. She accepted all of him, the scarred shoulder, the rough hands, the silent, brooding heart. She took all of him in, without fear, without hesitation. They moved together with the slow, powerful rhythm of the turning seasons. It was a claiming. It was a vow. It was the healing of two souls who had, against all odds, found their other broken half. It was summer. The days were long, hot, and full of the buzzing of insects and the smell of hot pine. The garden Lydia had fenced was thriving. She was growing beans and potatoes and 3 stubborn tomato plants. Boone had been at his small forge all afternoon. The tink, tink, tink of his hammer a steady rhythm in the heat. Lydia was hanging clean sheets on a line, a luxury that still made her marvel. The smell of the lye soap and the sun was sharp. "Lydia," he called. She turned. He was standing by the forge, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was awkward, embarrassed. She walked over, curious. "What is it? Did you fix the kettle?" "No," he said. He was looking at the ground, not at her. He was a man who could face down 5 gunmen, but he could not meet her eyes. He held out his hand, his big, calloused, soot-stained palm. In the center of it sat a ring. It was not gold, it was not shiny. It was iron, black, heavy, and twisted. He had hammered it, heated it, and twisted the metal into a simple, beautiful knot. He had polished it, not to a shine, but to a deep, dark luster. It was rough, it was imperfect, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. I melted down the old trap," he mumbled, finally looking at her. The one that caught Jed." He had taken the instrument of their violence and forged it into a symbol of their future. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. Tears filled her eyes, blurring his face. She thought of her first ring, the cold gold band of her marriage, the symbol of her failure, which she had thrown into a river in Utah. Boone just held the iron ring out. He didn't ask, he didn't know the words. She held out her left hand, her fingers trembling. He picked up the ring, his touch surprisingly careful, and slid it onto her finger. It was heavy, solid. It was a promise. It was an anchor. It fit perfectly. Lydia looked at the dark, rough metal against her skin. "I never thought," she whispered, her voice choked with tears, "I'd be anyone's again." Boone's hand closed over hers, his thumb rubbing the iron ring. He looked at her, his gray eyes steady, fierce, and full of a love that was as solid as the mountain around them. "You're not?" he answered, his voice rough. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers. "You're mine, and I'm yours. That's all." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed it. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you never miss a new story. And finally, we invite you to share your thoughts in English. What did you think of Boone and Lydia's journey? We read every comment. Thanks again.